Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Panasonic Lumix S 100mm f2.8 macro, a short telephoto lens with one-to-one close-up capabilities. It's designed for the full-frame L-mount system, which means it works on L-mount bodies from Panasonic, Sigma and Leica. I tested it on the Lumix S5.2, one of the best value full-framers around, and if you're interested in this body, I have a separate review all about it. Announced in January 2024 and costing around $999 or pounds, the S100 becomes Panasonic's first macro lens for the L-mount system. It doubles the macro options for full-frame L-mount owners, joining Sigma's earlier 105mm f2.8 DGDN from 2020, which cost just over two-thirds the price at around $700 or pounds. Note Leica also has a 60mm 2.8 macro lens for L-mount, but it's designed for smaller APS-C sensors, or of course full-frame bodies in crop modes. So if you want a proper full-frame L-mount macro lens, it's down to the Sigma 150 and the new Lumix S100. Both of these lenses are capable of delivering life-size, one-to-one reproduction or 1x magnification from a reasonable focusing distance, and also double up as good portrait options with a similar focal length and the same f2.8 maximum aperture. But physically they're quite different beasts, and despite sharing the same 74mm diameter, the newer Lumix lens is over 50mm shorter and less than half the weight of the Sigma lens too. Indeed, it's around half the weight of equivalent macro lenses for other systems as well, making it one of the most compact, full-frame macro lenses to date. Here it is, mounted on the S5.2 body, where you can see the barrel is noticeably shorter than many rival telephoto macro lenses. It's also light enough to be a good walk-around option. Let's now switch it for the Lumix S 85mm 1.8 lens, and you'll see Panasonic has maintained a similar size, in turn matching their other 1.8 primes. This should mean minimal, if any, rebalancing on stands and gimbals, and the filter thread is the same across them all too. In terms of designs and controls, it's pretty simple, matching the other primes in this series. There's a generous and smooth manual focusing ring, and a pair of switches, including a focus limiter with 3 ranges, 20 to 50cm, 50cm to infinity, or the full range. Panasonic describes the lens as being dust, splash and freeze resistant down to -10°C, and there's a rubber grommet at the mount. Meanwhile, at the other end is the same 67mm filter thread as the other primes in this series, minimising the need for different accessories. Panasonic also includes a bayonet mounted lens hood which can be reversed for transportation. In terms of autofocus, the lens felt swift on the S5.2, whether photographing normal or at macro distances. Like all macro lenses, the speed and confidence will benefit from setting the focus limiter, so when you're shooting macro, go for the 20 to 50cm range, and for normal use, the 50cm to infinity should suffice for most situations. Now for my optical results, and as a macro lens, I'm going to start with the close-up capabilities, kicking off with a bokeh ball comparison. Here's the Lumix S 100mm 2.8 wide open from a distance of about 80cm. Now I chose this initially so that I could make a direct comparison against the Lumix S85 1.8, which may not be a macro lens, but it does sport a brighter aperture. So now here's the S100 macro on the left and the S85 on the right, both from the same distance and at their maximum respective apertures of f2.8 and f1.8. Now this again is as close as the 85 lens will focus, and from the same position it'll deliver slightly larger bokeh balls with its larger aperture, more than making up for a slightly shorter focal length. In terms of rendering style though, they're looking pretty similar here. But of course as a macro lens, the S100 on the left can focus much closer, so let's now switch it for an image taken from a much closer distance, where the difference has now become pretty dramatic. But this is actually only around 0.5x magnification, so let's now switch this image for as close as the lens can focus, where it'll deliver 1x magnification, more than filling the frame with the star atop the ornament. The Lumix S100 delivers its maximum magnification from a distance of 20.4cm versus around 30cm on the Sigma lens. Both allow you to be positioned far enough from the subject to avoid casting shadows on it, and once you've taken the lens barrel into consideration, you're looking at a gap of around 11cm from the tip of the new Lumix lens to the subject itself in order to achieve one-to-one reproduction. I confirmed the maximum magnification by photographing my ruler as close as I could focus on it, here delivering 34mm across the frame. Given the S5.2 sensor measures 35.6mm across, this represents fractionally greater than one-to-one reproduction. I think more importantly though, it's an impressively flat field with little to no distortion and sharp details right into the corners even when the lens is wide open at f2.8. As I close the aperture, there is some benefit to the ultimate sharpness and lifting vignetting in the corners, but I was impressed by the quality at f2.8 from the closest focusing distance here. Now for some more shots at the minimum distance and maximum magnification. As you can see from this distance and aperture, the depth of field is unforgivably shallow at f2.8, so for greater depth, of course, just stop the lens down. This next shot was taken at f16. Now if you're new to one-to-one macro, you may be surprised how shallow the depth of field is even when the lens is closed down by several stops. I took this photo of a lemon wedge at f8, where there's still some quite nice blurring beyond that surface plane. Here I've stuck with f8 to capture more of the fine details between the pages of this book, although you may prefer the look of this version taken at f2.8. Personally, I love how macro photography reveals details in everyday subjects that you're rarely aware of, like these mould and sea salt crystals snapped at f11. Or how about this cheese biscuit, again taken at f11. Sometimes I prefer the creative opportunities at f2.8 though, such as this fork or Christmas decoration, both benefiting from some nice blurring. While the autofocus did a pretty good job at close distances, especially when the range was reduced, I personally prefer to nail the focus manually to ensure the desired portions of the subject are sharp. The smooth and nicely damped manual focusing ring on the lens makes this easy, although do note that while focus breathing is pretty minimal at normal distances, there are some substantial differences when adjusting the focus within the closest couple of centimeters. While focus breathing isn't uncommon on macro lenses at their closest distances, I did wonder how this might affect focus stacking in software later. So to try it out, I positioned a UK pound coin with the lower edge positioned at the minimum focusing distance. Now I took these at f4.5 where the depth of field is only showing the tip of the coin in sharp focus. I then set up a focus bracketed sequence on the S5 II, and after some experimentation I found that I needed around 80 frames at intervals of 3 to capture focus strips of the coin all the way from the front to the back. Now as I scroll through this sequence from the front to the rear of the coin, note how the effect of breathing gradually shrinks the subject size as the lens adjusts from its closest focusing distance to a couple of centimeters further away. Now it's quite visible here, but to see if it would actually present a practical problem during the software composite process, I imported the 80 image sequence into Helicon Focus, my preferred software for stacking. You can see it here gradually combining the focused elements of each image into a single one. And here's the end result, showing not just the entire coin surface in sharp focus as desired, but also apparently unaffected by any magnification differences due to focus breathing. As such, I wouldn't say it's going to be an issue for anyone who's into focus stacking to increase the apparent depth of field. Before moving on to more normal distances, I thought it would be interesting to compare the stacked coin image on the left with a single image on the right, this time focused in the middle of the coin and starting here wide open at f2.8 where obviously only a very narrow plane is in focus. And now let's switch the single frame on the right to one at f5.6. And next to f11, where there's still insufficient depth of field to have a fully sharp surface. And while the lens can be closed further to f22, it's still not actually enough for this particular subject, while additionally suffering from softening due to diffraction, not to mention having an increased risk of camera shake or the necessity of a higher ISO. This is why focus stacking is a popular technique for macro photographers. So overall, a solid performance from the Lumix S100 as a one-to-one macro lens, but how about using it at more normal distances? Here's a quick portrait test with yours truly, snapped at f2.8, illustrating how much blurring you can expect at this kind of distance. And looking closely at the details, they're very nice and sharp around my eyes. Let's put the 100 2.8 macro on the left and compare it with the 85 1.8 on the right, both at their maximum apertures. The camera's in the same position on both shots, but I've moved forward a little bit for the 85 to roughly match the subject size on the frame. You can see how the 85 has captured a slightly wider field of view thanks to its slightly shorter focal length, but it's also delivered more blurring in the background thanks to both its larger aperture and my slightly closer distance to the lens. But look closer at the details and you'll see the 100 2.8 macro on the left has sharper details on my eyes versus the 85 wide open on the right. Now the 85 will roughly match it when it's also set to f2.8, but the 100 is certainly performing pretty well as a portrait lens. Now you can of course also use either lens to present video to camera with similar results, and here you can see the 100 2.8 macro focusing as close as you dare to stand to it. Sorry for peering into your soul with my wrinkly eyes here. And now for both lenses side by side from the same camera position, with the 100 2.8 macro on the left and the 85 1.8 on the right, again both at their maximum respective apertures of f2.8 and f1.8. And finally, a test of the lens at more of a landscape distance, here with bright and peer angled so that details run into the corners. I've focused in the middle of the frame here, and I'm starting with the lens fully open to f2.8, where you'll enjoy sharp details in the centre, with minimal benefit to closing the aperture any further. Moving out into the corner of the f2.8 image, you'll find details remain respectably sharp, and only minor evidence of darkening due to vignetting. As you close the aperture, you'll quickly eliminate any corner darkening, and there's also minor gains to be had in ultimate sharpness, but again the lens is performing pretty well across the frame even with the aperture wide open. And now for my final verdict, during which I'll show you a bunch of sample images, many of which are also available on my matching review page at cameralabs.com if you'd like a closer look. The Lumix S 100mm 2.8 macro is a welcome addition to the L-mount system, delivering sharp results across the frame near and far. In my tests it was equally sharp whether shooting landscapes at infinity, portraits from a metre or so, or right up to its closest focusing distance. And with the subject around 11 cm from the tip of the lens, you'll achieve life-size 1x magnification, again with sharp details and impressively minimal distortion. It's not the only game in town though for full-frame L-mount owners, as Sigma's Ultra 105 2.8 DGDN also delivers 1x magnification on full-frame bodies from a similar focal length lens with the same aperture and at a lower price. Now, I've not tested the Sigma lens, so I can't comment on its optical quality, but I can tell you the Lumix lens is comfortably shorter and less than half the weight, making it a much more portable proposition, not to mention a more consistent match for the existing Lumix S primes. So I'd recommend that you compare these two lenses closely, but one thing's for certain, the Lumix S 100 2.8 macro delivers the goods at all distances with an impressively compact form factor. So it's highly recommended to L-mount owners who want a great quality macro lens, which also doubles as a decent portrait and walk around telephoto option. And that's it for this review. Let me know what you think in the comments and if you'd like me to review more L-mount lenses. It's certainly becoming a compelling system, especially with all of Sigma's mirrorless lenses and Panasonic's great value bodies. And in the absence of a sponsor for this video, I'll just thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.